Hello, everyone. The case I'm going to tell you all about today is quite shocking, but I definitely think this case is worth talking about. I think it really showcases that sometimes, no matter how hard you try to teach your children to be safe, bad things can still unfortunately happen. And sometimes monsters lurk around the corner that you would never suspect. So let's get into this one. Today's case takes place in Westminster, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. In 2012, Jessica Ridgeway was a 10-year-old girl living with her grandmother Christine and her mother Sarah at the time of her disappearance. Her parents, Sarah and Jeremiah, had split up and her father had moved to Missouri. Jessica was described as a happy, easy child despite sometimes acting like a teenager, even though she was nowhere close to being one. Jessica was on the Pee Wee cheerleading squad. She loved to make up dances. Her favorite color was purple, and she had a black and white dog that she'd always helped take care of. She was fiercely independent and described as responsible, and I'd honestly say she was very mature sounding for her age. Jessica had her own alarm clock that would wake her up every day. She'd get herself up for school, she'd put on her glasses, make herself some breakfast, fill up her water bottle, and head off to school on her own. And it seemed like she'd do this a lot because her mother actually worked nights, so she usually slept during the day, so Jessica kind of had to have that own responsibility for herself to get herself up to go to school because by the time her mother got home from work, she was exhausted. The morning of October 5th felt like any other school day, although it was a snowy one. Jessica followed her routine, dressing in her black boots, a black jacket, and her favorite purple glasses, before kissing her mother goodbye and heading off for her walk to school down Moore Street. Jessica's school, which was Whit Stem Elementary, was less than a 15-minute walk down quiet residential streets and across an open field. But this is kind of just me assuming her walk. From what I've seen from Google Maps, if she walked down these streets and then cut across the back field, she could go through the back of the school. But if she wanted to go through the front of the school, she'd have to go all the way around and it would take about 30 minutes. So I'm pretty sure she just cut across, but I could be wrong. Again, I'm just making assumptions there. Either way, Jessica would walk herself to school, or at least she'd made it to school every day before this one. Now, normally Jessica would also meet a friend at the end of the street and the two would walk together, but on October 5th, Jessica's little friend was left standing out in the cold alone. Teachers would attempt to call Jessica's mother, Sarah, to let them know that her daughter hadn't made it to school that day, but Sarah had went to bed after Jessica had left because, once again, she worked nights, so by the time she'd get home and get Jessica on her way, she would go to sleep. So unfortunately, Sarah was asleep and missed all of the phone calls from the school. Sarah wouldn't wake up until shortly after 4 p.m. that day, and when she would wake up, she woke up to a nightmare. Jessica wasn't home from school, and there were multiple missed phone calls on her phone. And when she played those calls, she realized that Jessica hadn't made it to school that day, and so Sarah went into a panic and called 911.
Westminster 911, what is the address of your emergency?
It's 10786 Moore Street.
10786 Moore Street?
Yeah.
Okay, what's going on there?
My daughter's missing. I guess she never made it to school this morning.
How old's your daughter?
She's 10.
Okay, what's your daughter's name?
Jessica Ridgeway.
And when did you last see her?
This morning when she left at 8:30.
Did she walk?
Yeah. And I checked her friend's house that she walked and they're not answering the door.
And you said that the school called, so they weren't?
And I work nights, so I slept through the call.
Okay, sir, sorry about that. We've got several officers on the way over to help you out, okay?
Police would respond and contact the father of Jessica's friend that she would normally walk to school with, and he'd also confirm that Jessica hadn't made it to meet up with his son that day. This meant that police thought she had gone missing between the time she left her home to where she would normally meet up with her friend about a block away. And around this area was a park called Chelsea Park that they would normally meet near. But how did little Jessica disappear within a 2-minute walk of her home? It would take around 5 hours for an Amber Alert to be put out around 9 p.m. But in the meantime, friends and family began a search for little Jessica. By now it was dark, so police attempted to use helicopters with night vision to search for the little girl, but due to the weather, these attempts ended up being grounded.
When we start with an 8-hour delay or a delay as substantial as this, the distance that she could have wandered, even on her own, it just gets huge.
Police say Jessica's father, who lives out of state, is in a custody battle with Jessica's mother. They do not believe Jessica is with him, but are not ruling anyone out.
We don't have a person of interest, and we're going to look at every angle. We're going to look at every angle multiple times.
Police are searching vast areas of terrain, including fields and lakes. Bad weather kept search helicopters grounded, but about 150 volunteers turned out to help.
Nothing like this has really ever happened. Like, it's always surprising when something happens here.
When the sun comes up, police say they will be bringing in even more people to help search for Jessica. They're also hoping for a break in the weather so they can get helicopters up to search from the sky.
Police would then try to move on to using thermal imaging equipment, but still Jessica was not found. By the morning, both law enforcement and civilian volunteers continued the search for the little missing girl. They brought back the helicopters and the search dogs, but still nothing was found. There were no signs of Jessica. It wouldn't be until 2 days later that Jessica's pink Victoria Justice backpack would end up being found on a sidewalk along Andrews Drive near Alpha Court in Superior, about a 10-minute drive northwest of her home. That's definitely kind of far for a 10-year-old to walk if you would go along the route that she ran away or wandered away. And it's also in the complete opposite direction of her school. This backpack had actually been discovered by a man who noticed it outside of his home. Him and his neighbor ended up deciding to check it out after they noticed that there was a keychain on it that read Jessica. And when they looked inside, they also found a water bottle that had the same name inside. This neighbor ended up deciding to post it online in case anyone knew whose backpack this could be. The post ended up reading, "Children's backpack found this morning on the sidewalk at Andrew Drive in Alpha Court. Water bottle has Jessica Ridgeway on it. Come and get it." Someone then ended up contacting this neighbor, pointing out the backpack's significance, and according to police, this person ended up contacting 911 to report it. The FBI would end up arriving to investigate and determined it was in fact Jessica Ridgeway's backpack. Inside, they would end up finding her water bottle, her boots, as well as her glasses and urine-soaked clothing. After doing some more digging and talking to neighbors about when the backpack was actually spotted, police determined it had been dumped sometime between 7 to 10 p.m. on October 6th. And considering that time frame and the items found inside of the backpack, what happened to Jessica was starting to seem more sinister. 5 days after her disappearance on October 10th, a tip would lead law enforcement to the town of Arvada. Here, human remains would end up being discovered at Patridge Open Space, an old mining area that was now a large patch of open land with trails and mountain views. This park was also only a 13-minute drive away from Jessica's home. These human remains would end up being discovered inside of a black trash bag and were determined to have been dismembered. Inside of this bag was only a torso. No limbs, and no head. Due to the state of these remains that were found, Jessica's family would end up having to wait for a DNA test to determine who these remains belonged to. But in the end, it would be determined that the torso found in this bag belonged to 10-year-old Jessica Ridgeway. During the autopsy, the medical examiner found a number of very disturbing things. Jessica's body had been cleaned or washed. Her internal organs had also been removed, and they ended up discovering a small wooden cross inside the cavity of her lower regions. It turns out that at this point, police had been suspicious of Jessica's parents since they had a pending divorce, and they hadn't ruled them out yet. And on one hand, that's very understandable because children are more likely to be killed or harmed by family members and friends, close people to them. But on another hand, that is very horrific for a parent to have to go through. Not only are they mourning their child's death, but now they're also being looked at as the suspect. When Jessica's father, Jeremiah Bryant, was approached by FBI and asked if he thought Jessica's mother, Sarah, had committed the murder, he was quoted saying, "I don't see how any parent could do something like that to their child." On top of that, there didn't seem to be any kind of nasty custody dispute, and there were no hostile feelings between the parents. But if it wasn't Jessica's parents, that meant that there was a horrific murderer on the loose. One that kidnapped and dismembered little girls. But this case wasn't about to go cold. A second set of DNA had actually been discovered on Jessica's backpack. Meanwhile, police continued to canvass the area and knock on doors in the surrounding area of where Jessica had gone missing. And they actually had ended up collecting, around 700 DNA samples. On October 17th, police would end up speaking to a woman named Mindy Sigg, and she reported to live with her 2 sons. And one of her sons in particular actually gave the neighbors some bad vibes, because 2 days later, one of those neighbors would end up submitting to the FBI that they should look into one of Mindy's sons named Austin, citing he was odd and disturbing, had an obsession with death, and that the neighbors ended up recognizing that cross that had been found. That very one that was found inside of Jessica. Police would end up questioning Austin and even searching his home, but they ended up not finding any evidence to charge him. Austin also claimed to be sleeping while Jessica was abducted, which isn't really the best alibi. Police would also end up searching Austin's father's home, which turned out to be a mansion in the town of Parker, which was southeast of Denver. It turns out that Austin's father owned a media company and owned a large estate that overlooked the town, so it was thought that Austin would have had easy access to hide, more evidence or the rest of Jessica's body somewhere. Police would also end up obtaining a DNA sample from Austin via a buccal swab, which they would use to compare to the DNA that they found on her backpack. Now, what I found was very interesting. When police ended up sending this DNA test in of Austin's to compare to Jessica's DNA, it actually came back negative. Austin's DNA was not a match to the DNA found on Jessica's backpack. But Austin began to get nervous, thinking police might have found something to match his DNA to. And I say this because on October 23rd, Austin Sigg would end up confessing to his mother, Mindy, that he murdered Jessica and that her remains were inside of their home. And Austin would confess a lot on the 911 call that his mother placed. And he would confess it very nonchalantly.
Hi, this is Molly at Westminster Police. Can I help you? Hi, I need you to come to my house. My son wants to turn himself in for the Jessica Ridgeway murder.
Okay, what's the address?
10622 West 102nd Avenue.
And what's going on there? Ma'am,
You not hear me? He just confessed to killing her.
I know. I want you to tell me what's going on. Can you tell me exactly what he said?
But he did it, and he gave me details, and her remains are in my house.
Did you see them?
No.
Is he there with you?
Yes.
Is he cooperative?
Yes.
How old is your son?
17.
Hold on 1 second. What is your son's name?
Austin Sigg.
Can you spell it? You said Austin?
Mhm.
Okay, and spell his last name for me.
S as in Sam, I-G-G.
Okay, I understand that you're probably, feeling pretty crappy right now, but I want you to know that you did the right thing by calling.
He did it. He just wanted me to call. He is turning himself in.
Okay, do you think that he's going to be cooperative with the officers?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I just want to verify you're at 10622 102 Avenue.
Yeah.
Do you think that Austin would talk to me?
Will you talk to her? Yeah, hold on.
Okay.
Hello?
Is this Austin?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Austin. This is Molly at the Westminster Police Department.
Hi.
Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on right now, or how you're feeling, or how did this come about?
I don't exactly get why you're asking these questions. I murdered Jessica Ridgeway.
Okay.
I have proof that I did it. There is no other question. You just have to send a squad car, something down here, and
Right.
I will answer all the questions that you want to ask,
Okay.
or anyone wants to ask of me as soon as you gotta get down here.
Okay. Austin, I have a police officer that's going to come over to your house, okay? Can you tell me what part of the house that her remains are in?
Underneath the house and a crawl space.
Okay, did you know Jessica before this?
No, I did not.
Are you going to school anywhere?
We're at the Hope Community College.
And you're 17?
Yes.
Okay, Austin, can you tell me your date of birth?
January 17th, 1995.
Okay, I want you to know that you did the right thing, okay? And I do have a police officer that's on the way to talk to you. Okay. Do you have any weapons in your house?
I do, but I plan to use absolutely none of them. I will be sitting in my front room when the police officer arrives. Or I'll be right next to my mother. I have knives in my room, and we own a few guns, but I'm giving myself up completely. There will be no resistance whatsoever.
Okay. Have you committed any crimes like this before? This the first? Do you have a criminal history of any sort?
The only other thing that I have done that before this was the Kettner Lake incident where the woman got attacked. That was me as well. And Other than that, the only criminal history I have is a speeding ticket.
It turns out that Austin actually only lived 3 minutes away from Jessica's home. And when I tell you more about the 17-year-old, you will be horrified, because I was. In the 911 call, Austin admitted to a second incident. This incident he referred to took place 4 months prior to Jessica's murder, when Austin had unsuccessfully tried to kidnap a female jogger in Kenter Lake. He had attempted to attack her from behind and cover her face with a cloth soaked in homemade chloroform that he had made, but this woman ended up getting away. Austin had actually made a big mistake thinking that police had matched his DNA, because it also turned out, as I stated, that the lab had made an error when it came back negative. But once Austin made this confession, police would retest his DNA, so they were really confused how he could admit all of this, but then at the same time the DNA was negative. When they retested his DNA, it would come back positive. But what's really wild about this case is that they only retested his DNA after Austin admitted and turned himself in. So it's really crazy to think that this murderer could have gone free and never been caught because of a lab error, because police had kind of ruled Austin out. But Austin's life was a lot darker than just that. Austin Sigg had grown up in Westminster with his mother Mindy and his brother, and his parents were divorced. And what I found is that Austin was a very, very disturbed child. At the age of 12, Austin was caught looking at CP. You heard me right. And he was caught by his mother.
Has Austin been diagnosed with any mental health issues? Does he see a counselor or take any medication?
He saw a counselor years ago for porn.
Okay.
And we were talking, and we think that might have led to it, but I don't know.
Now, his mother Mindy ended up attempting to take him to therapy, but it pretty much didn't work. Austin also liked to collect knives and samurai swords that you could see in photos of his very messy bedroom. Austin was also very fascinated with death, and this led him to college, where he started taking classes in mortuary science. And Austin did very well in these classes. He also did very well in crime scene investigation competitions in school. So yeah, this murderer was literally studying to become a better killer. His brother would also recall him joking about taking classes where he was, and I quote, learning how to kill people and be able to get away with it, end quote. Neither of Austin's parents were going to win Parent of the Year either. His father had multiple arrests, from everything from bank fraud to DV to assault. Mindy was also known to joke with her friends about her son's fascination with body decomp, and would also help her son practice restraining someone with zip ties. Now that's pretty fucked up. At 16, Austin's tastes of CP got darker, as he developed an obsession with hardcore CP and spent a year watching violent depictions of children being tortured, R-worded, and dismembered. The fact that that even exists on the internet, let alone the 16-year-old was watching for fun and to get off to, is just, it's disgusting. And the fact that he'd been watching it since he was 12 I'm shocked. At the same time, though, Austin somehow had a girlfriend. I'm not sure how, but she claims that he would sleep over at his house once a week. But according to his mother, Mindy, her son was gone for up to 4 times a week. So what Austin was doing for those other days where he was MIA, no one seems to really know. But for the fact that this mother didn't know where her teenage son was 4 days out of the week, I am very confused by. What's really fascinating to me, besides the fact that he had a girlfriend, is that all of his friends at school were actually shocked by the news that Austin had murdered someone.
He was always just the kid that would always ride on his scooter, and he would, I don't necessarily remember how I met him. He would just always ask to play with us when we were younger.
And just talk about what kind of a guy he was.
He was very quiet, shy, and to himself. I would say he was gothic. He never really talked about his family or his friends. All he talked about was playing or spending time with us. He always wanted to just play capture the flag. That was his main thing, was to play capture the flag with us.
What kind of guy was he? I mean, is he the kind of guy that could murder a little girl?
He's a smart. We never thought, it was shocking.
He was the kid that went around school, and the kids who walked down the hall alone, he would walk with you. He was one of those that always talked to everybody, always said hi to everybody, knew everybody. He was so nice.
When's the last time any of you talked to him or saw him?
I saw him like last week.
Yeah,
I saw him last week. We didn't think anything would happen.
Just the other day, because he lives up the street from me.
He lives down the street.
Yeah.
We grew, like, seriously, we grew up with this kid, so we didn't understand why he would do this. We didn't even see it coming.
What was he into? What kind of stuff was he interested in?
He loves computers.
Video games.
Very smart.
He liked spending time with family and his girlfriend and all that.
This kid had everyone fooled, despite how disturbed he was. Meanwhile, police were swarming the Sigg residence after that 911 call. Officers searching the home would end up finding black trash bags in the crawl space resembling the same bags used to wrap Jessica's torso. They would also find a weed plant along with her remains in this crawl space. They would also discover zip ties in Austin's Jeep. Austin Sigg would end up being interrogated, and he said a lot. He would admit to murdering Jessica, saying that he was consumed by some sort of sexual drive, but he would not admit to R-wording her. Although I did see it stated later that he would eventually come out and confess and admit that he had lied and that he actually had, which is just terrible. Austin would also admit to police that he had worn gloves when he had handled Jessica's items and her remains, and that he had washed her body twice, all things that he had learned from his classes in college. He didn't know Jessica, though. She was a stranger to him. However, he did live in the area, and he also had went to Witt Elementary as a child. It honestly could have been anyone's child that was snatched up that day. Jessica had just been an easy victim to him, especially since he had attempted to attack an older girl, and he had been unsuccessful, so it seemed like he had decided to try someone more vulnerable that couldn't get away from him and that he could easily just snatch up, which is really sad because he is a giant fucking coward and he just wanted to pick on someone smaller than him that he could overpower.
I don't know, the whole idea of being, you know, a forensic scientist, all that stuff, it comes with that morbid territory. And I wasn't faced by anything that was morbid that they could show me. And I don't know, from there I knew that, I don't know,
Also, let me ask you a question.
Morbid things just stopped fazing me. I had never fully thought, and I had never actually fully planned through what I was going to do with it, what I was going to do, any of that. It just...
Well, when you went out that morning, Friday morning, October 5th, which was early in the morning, and you drove over to Jessica's neighborhood, what were you planning on doing that day?
I had the intent of picking up any female that came across where I was. That it didn't matter what time, where, it just anything.
So you were out, for a better word, hunting?
Yeah, that's the only word I could think of.
And did you know Jessica?
No.
Had you ever seen her before?
No, not at all. She was wrong place, wrong time. It was all random. It was...
You didn't stop the neighborhood or go over to that neighborhood and was looking for her? Have you been out before looking for somebody?
I had gone out before hunting, as you would call it, and I had never even remotely gotten close to anything or even been able to... Anytime that I would even see someone walking while I was out in one of those modes, my heart would just instantly start beating really fast, and I couldn't think straight. I don't know.
Was that some of the thrill that you got by going out and doing this? Was there a thrill aspect to it?
I've been trying to figure that out.
Austin would also eventually tell authorities how he had ended up kidnapping and murdering Jessica. And it's hard to listen to, but I'm going to go through it so that we could fully understand what happened. Austin would explain how he had grabbed Jessica quickly as she was walking down the sidewalk and he had drove away.
Go on and tell me what happened after you grabbed her.
She screamed and I told her to be quiet, and I used zip ties to zip tie her hands and legs together, and I hopped in the front of my car and I drove her around for probably a good 10-20 minutes. I asked her if she had a cell phone, looked for that. She kept asking me questions, and I would answer them, and I would lie to her. I would tell her that everything was going to be okay, and I would just lie to her.
According to Austin, he knew from the beginning that he was going to murder her, but he told her that she was going to be safe and that she would see her mom again. And he said all of this in an attempt to keep her calm. He would end up binding her hands and feet with plastic zip ties, and says that he drove around for half an hour, making random turns before eventually driving to his mother's home. From there, he would end up pulling into the garage and shutting the garage door. There at the house, he would end up torturing Jessica, cutting off bits of her hair while watching cartoons. And from there, he ended up having to actually change her into his own t-shirt and shorts because she had urinated on herself. Now, keep in mind, we only have Austin's word to go on from this, and authorities believe that all of this could be lies and that he actually did so much worse to Jessica. We also have to keep in mind that he at some point R-worded her, which is horrific. During his confession, he would also go into more details on how he murdered her. Austin says that he had first attempted to strangle Jessica with zip ties, but this didn't work because they were cutting into his hands. He then attempted to manually strangle her with his bare hands until she was barely alive. When he then realized that there was a little bit of life left in her, he then drowned her in a bathtub of scalding hot water. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using an electric saw, utility knife, and razor blades. He labeled the bags of certain body parts while flushing parts of her dismembered hands and feet down the toilet, which I'm honestly shocked that worked because in the Adam Strong case, it didn't work, and that's what ended up backfiring and ending up getting him caught. If you haven't watched that video, I'll have a card up here. I highly recommend watching it. It is an insane case. Austin initially hid Jessica's remains in a pool shed in his backyard and then drove around looking to dispose of her other items. He'd eventually throw her backpack where it would be found on that sidewalk, and he threw her jacket in a trash can, but I'm not sure if that was ever recovered. When canines started to be used, this is when Austin started to get nervous because the remains were in his backyard and he was scared that they would sniff them out. So he ended up putting his medical examiner training to good use, and he ended up bringing her body back inside, dismembering it more, removing her organs, and then washing her body twice to get rid of any DNA evidence that he would have transferred to it. He would place the cross inside of her where it would later be discovered, and then he would dump her torso where that also would be found. I read a quote from a site called Modern Murder, and I really agree with this quote, so I wanted to read it to you all. It read, "He chose to put a holy symbol in a spot where he degraded her sexually and stole her innocence and then dumped her body in a trash bag. He had no respect for her before or after her death." And I think that sums up Austin Sigg pretty good. Police would end up asking Austin why he had attempted to attack that female jogger earlier in the year and what he was planning on doing to her, and he would respond saying that he would have had done the exact same thing he ended up doing to Jessica Ridgeway if he had been able to subdue her. But it seems like he also had a plan to dump the jogger's body in some sort of sulfur pits in the Colorado mountains. He also admitted that he had gone out quote-unquote hunting on multiple different occasions, but he had never gotten the courage to actually act on his urges and take someone. Austin was essentially attempting to fulfill a sexual fantasy that had been growing for a long time, something we very often see with serial killers. Austin would first be sent to a juvenile facility due to only being 17, but he would later be charged as an adult and moved to an adult facility. He would also end up receiving 17 counts against him, 11 of them being from Jessica and the others being from that jogger he attempted to snatch. 2 of the counts would end up being dropped, and he shockingly pleaded not guilty to all of this after admitting everything. In October of 2013, however, Austin would eventually plead guilty last minute, right before the court proceedings were going to start. And this sick motherfucker would end up being charged with 15 counts. And I'm going to list them all for you because I think we all need to hear these to fully grasp how fucked up he was. And I'm sorry I'm cussing so much, but I think it's necessary here. Austin Sigg would end up being charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of second-degree kidnapping, essay of a child, robbery, essay, 3 counts of exploitation of a child, 5 charges of violent crime, and attempted second-degree kidnapping. As you can guess, after all of those charges, he would be sentenced to life in prison. Prosecutors in court testimony suggested that Austin spent months planning and studying, searching the internet for chloroform recipes and the top 10 places people get abducted. Austin's confidence in his methods, however, led to some of his greatest downfalls. Psychologist Ann Salter noted Austin showed signs of sadistic necrophilia with psychopathic traits, and that he was not truly psychotic, though. Dr. Salter explained how remorse for crimes happens before the perpetrator is caught, and that Austin did not show any signs of remorse until police were closing in on him. She has alluded to the conclusion that Austin was not remorseful for his actions, but rather that he was in getting caught. Another article said, the evidence shows Sigg as an inept and callous liar whose chilling confessions may have been understatements or outright fiction. Because I said police kind of suspected that storyline, that timeline of what happened when he murdered Jessica and what he did to her, the torture, the R, that he kind of downplayed everything because he didn't want to be seen as fucked up as he truly is, which everything we already know is so fucked up. I honestly don't want to know deeper details at this point. And I'm sure he did a lot worse to this poor little girl than he even said, because he's too embarrassed to admit. He doesn't want to be looked at, as any more of a child R-word as he already is. Not shocked he didn't want to admit it, because especially going to jail, we know what happens to child predators in jail. And I honestly think that Jessica's mother was a badass in the end. Sarah Ridgeway refused to give Austin any satisfaction while she was reading her impact statement. She would not allow him to see any of the suffering that he had caused her and her family.
So, I'm actually not going to say anything today, because I don't think that the defendant has the right to hear how he affected me, my family, or who Jessica was. Once we walk out of this courtroom, we'll not remember his name, and we'll all only remember Jessica and the legacy she created, as well as the Lassie project in which she inspired. Thank you. Thank you.
Something that I wanted to bring up that I think was kind of sweet and, a light at the end of all of this tragedy that happened. Chelsea Park, that park that Jessica would pass while going to school every day. It was a park near her home. I'm sure she played at it quite often. This park ended up being renamed to Jessica Ridgeway Memorial Park. There's also multiple purple statues at the park that signify her favorite color. I've seen so many positive Google reviews about this park. Even one mother said that they love to bring their children to this park, and that they told them Jessica's story, and that it's just a place that just brings so much happiness to people now. Something that Jessica was just so happy and such a fun young child. But back to Austin for a moment. I really think that if Austin hadn't have turned himself in, I think he would have been a very dangerous, violent serial killer by now. He was methodical. He was violent. He was someone that should never see the light of day again. And I think he is a perfect example of that. The fact that he was only caught because he got nervous that he didn't, clean her body well enough, or he had left DNA somewhere since they got that DNA sample. The fact that that is the only reason he ended up getting caught is wild to me. The police may have never solved Jessica's murder, and he could have still been walking those streets. And I think if he had not been caught for Jessica's murder or turned himself in, that there would have been a lot more blood on his hands and a lot more families missing loved ones. The fact that Austin Sigg was such a depraved human being at 17 years old is terrifying. And what I think is really sad and terrifying about Jessica's case is that she was taught everything we're told to teach our kids to be safe, to watch out for strangers, to not, play in places alone, to scream if someone tries to take you. Yet it didn't prevent Jessica from getting kidnapped. And I think that shows that we can try to be as careful as we try to be with ourselves and our children, but sometimes bad things can still happen. Little Jessica was just trying to get to school, and she had her life ripped away from her from a piece of shit named Austin Sigg. So how do you all feel about this case? Have you heard it before? I actually had never heard of this case before. I only found it because I was looking into another case and I seen it on my sidebar as a recommendation, and then I looked into a bit and then I fell down the rabbit hole, and now here we are. So yeah, that is the case of Jessica Ridgeway. And if you're not subscribed, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. It does help me continue to create content like this, tell these stories, spread the word about cases. I hope everyone stays safe out there, lock your doors and windows, and I will see you in the next case. Bye.